Chapter 1. After the intro, I thought I'd read some of the things that I've written about how I organized and gathered all this information. So, stories were told in English and Spanish. I expected to hear reruns, which is how we remember. This is the way of oral history. Whenever there was a death in the family, we gathered and reflected. Each death gifted me love and nostalgia, the desire to return to one's home, family, and friends, to the good parts of the old times. So after every funeral, I scoped out a spot at the kitchen table near my mom and her brothers and sisters, where I listened and waited. Then the inevitable frantic moment arrived when I had to find something to write with and on in order to be able to capture impromptu memories. There was always a napkin, but the only paper was a deposit slip from my checkbook. It was impossible to be in the moment, to not miss anything while jotting down names with arrows pointing to the associated family members and anecdotes. This was my training on remembering, the way elders for generations had learned to rely on their memory, hearing the stories. I was out of practice remembering, so I had to rely on a timeline of this history that I could see on paper. I wrote what I could in the moment and then tried to fill in the blanks later. Over many years, I created this file of notes, which I carried with me throughout my life. Now that I am retired, I have time to write. Our ancestral tree was too big for me to keep in my head, mostly because my aunts and uncles would do things like call their own mom and dad grandma and grandpa. Depending about whom they were speaking, they would say, "Grandma did this," thinking that this is how I would best understand. In other instances, they would be talking about their real grandparents, and it was up to me to be able to figure it all out. In addition to this, many relatives had the same names, or were adopted, or were given away to live with another relative who were not their biological parents. This was common and most likely due to the economy at the time and who could best take care of the child. Or in my grandfather Tranquilino Zuni's grandmother's case, she was a servant obtained in a place and time in the territory of New Mexico where Navajos and Zunis in the area were taken, bought, or traded. The name or identity of my grandfather's grandmother was always the great mystery, the one story that I have wanted to solve to this day. I would hear stories about her father, Don Jesus Landavazo, how he was called the blue-eyed Frenchman who hopped the fence, meaning that he had sex with someone other than his legal Spanish wife, Manuela Chavez Ibaca. Here is a photo of Don Jesus Landavazo and his legal Spanish wife, Manuelita, and a few of their children. I have noted that the labels for Manuel and Jacob should be switched. I haven't confirmed this, but I thought I would include that in the photo for a possible correction. So this is the infamous Don Jesus Landavazo, the blue-eyed Frenchman who hopped the fence, and that his wife Manuelita had so many children, many of them died in birth, and he and she would rather Don Jesus go hop the fence rather than mess with her, I suppose would be a good way to say it. There were stories about a woman he hopped the fence with that she was either Navajo or Zuni. Another story was about Don Jesus' Spanish wife dying, and then he married a Navajo. And then she died, and he married another quote-unquote Indian, either Navajo or Zuni. When I moved back to Santa Fe in 2016, I was in contact with a distant cousin, Donna, who lived in Arizona. Her father, Moises Baca, knew about Jesus and the Zuni servant. Moises said that Jesus used to take the Zuni servant out to the back of his home to the buge, which is a word for buggy because in those days they had transportation known as the horse and buggy. So the wooden buggy was in Jesus's backyard and a place to have his way with his servants. And so my great grandma, Sarah Landavazo, in this photo on the left, was the quote-unquote illegitimate daughter in the eyes of the other Landavazo family members. She was considered a half-breed and worse in those days, an Indian. Sarah had a half-sister, Maria Jesus, the photo on the right, who was born from another native servant, possibly Navajo. Both Sarah and Maria Jesus were left off of the family tree, which was displayed at a big Landavazo old-timers family reunion in Magdalena. And the next page will show the will, the dying last will and testament of Jesus Landavazo, and what he left for his two illegitimate daughters, Sarah and Maria Jesus. By the time Jesus made this last will and testament, his daughters Maria Jesus and Sara Landavazo, were married. Maria Jesus married into the Romero family, and Sara Landavazo married Claudio Baca. So here is his last will and testament, which the bottom is cut off, but I'll read it the way I have it. In the name of God, amen. I, Jesus Landavazo, a resident of the town of Magdalena, county of Socorro, state of New Mexico, being of the age of 65 years and of sound mind and memory, and realizing too my liableness to be overtaken by death at any time, do hereby publish and declare this my last will and testament, thereby revoking all former wills by me made. I hereby direct that after my death I be prepared for burial without pomp or splendor and according to the rites of the Roman Catholic Church. I hereby direct that as soon as practical after my death, the expense of my last illness and funeral expenses shall be paid, and thereafter all my just debts shall be paid as soon as shall be practical for my executor to do so. Executor to do so. I hereby give and bequeath unto my wife, and this was at the time he was married to Vivianita Landavazo, the house and lot in the town of Magdalena, county of Socorro, state of New Mexico, which we now occupy as a residence, together with all the buildings situated on said lot, and together with all the household furnishings of any kind or character whatsoever. I hereby give and bequeath unto my daughters, Maria Jesus Romero and Sara Baca, $1 each. And it looks like he squeezed that in because it was double spaced and then all of a sudden it's single spaced. So it looks like he squeezed in $1 for each of his illegitimate daughters. I hereby give and bequeath unto my son Manuel Landavazo 600 sheep to be selected by him from all the sheep that I may own at the time of my death. All the rest and residue of my estate I devise and bequeath share and share alike to be equally divided between each and all of my children, meaning and intending thereby that my son Francisco Landavazo, my son Bonifacio Landavazo, and there it's cut off. So they squeezed in $1 each for his Indian daughters. So I know everybody's got a dark side, shadow side, but there's good and bad in everyone. So I wanted to highlight some things about Jesus. This is a photo of him and Juan Garcia. I'm not sure who Juan Garcia is, but I remember names like that had to do with ranching, so partners in ranching. And also I wanted to say that in the mid-1800s in the territory of New Mexico, there existed a slave trade because slavery was illegal in New Mexico. Many Navajos and other natives were sold and traded. So we have much trauma in our DNA that someday will be healed. And also I have many notes about Jesus Landavazo. There are articles I found in the Socorro and Santa Fe newspapers where he was an important citizen in Socorro and in Magdalena, where he was the mayordomo. And a mayordomo is the person elected by the community to manage the infrastructure of irrigation. In the photo on the right, you can see that he has an arroyo and reservoir named after him. I'm not sure if it's still named that today, but I got this off of Google Maps, and it shows the name in Magdalena and the location. Mayordomos managed acequias, which are irrigation channels that carry snowmelt from the mountains to newly filled farm fields. Each annual cleaning of acequias brings communities together and make it possible to share a scarce resource, water, to make sure everyone in the group has enough. It is important technology that has been alive in New Mexico for hundreds of years, and one which is still vibrant today. It may save us as water becomes scarce here in the desert. Jesus's father, Don Francisco Landavazo y Ortega, had a water well in Mexico. These acequias are mutually managed irrigation channels that have been a continuous operation in the arid American Southwest since before the formation of the United States. This communal water system traces its roots to the Spanish conquistadors who brought their traditions to the New Mexico territory in the 1600s and who themselves borrowed it from the Muslims who invaded Spain in the 8th century. The word acequia is an adaptation of the Arabic Assaqiya, meaning water carrier. These gravity-fed ditches that bring runoff from the mountains to the fields have been operating for 3 centuries, and some were likely dug long before that, which can range between 1/3 and 1/2 of the flow, and it replenishes groundwater while also fostering a rich wetlands around each ditch. So this was an important job of Jesus, and I honor him for that. On the subject of water, Jesus Landavazo's father was Francisco Landavazo y Ortega, and his father was Francisco Diego Landavazo y Mondragon. So the latter was from Spain, and some say he was from Sevilla and Andalusia, Spain. Others talk about ancestors being from the Basque, which is in the north of Spain. I'm still researching that. However, Don Francisco Landavazo y Ortega, Jesus's father, was born in 1804 at Navajoa in the state of Sonora in the Republic of Mexico on the land granted to his father the Mondragon guy, by King Charles II of Spain in 1790. So the map shows where that is located, the city of Navajoa. And it says that after the grant of the lands, Don Francisco Landavazo y Mondragon came from Spain to Mexico in about 1800 and colonized the grant and cultivated a large tract of land at what then was known as La Noria de Landavazo, which is Landavazo's well in the state of Sonora. And this is about 160 miles south of Hermosillo. So the whole idea of water with Jesus and his father's father comes from many generations. It says that the land grant that he got, upon which Obregon settled after retiring from the presidency of Mexico, and upon which he produced many carloads of garbanzo beans. In his early youth, the younger Landavazo, which is Don Francisco Landavazo y Ortega, moved to New Mexico and was living there in February 1848 when the Treaty of the United States with Mexico, known as the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, came into effect. As he was already living there, he chose to remain, and under the treaty he became a citizen of the United States. So that was Jesus Landavazo's father they're speaking of. Let's see, it says that Jesus's father in 1848 married Clarita Sanchez, daughter of Don Diego Antonio Sanchez y Santanianos, at the rancho of her grandfather, Don Diego Antonio Sanchez y Baca, at what is now called Polvidero, New Mexico, 12 miles north of Socorro. The rancho was part of the Polvidera grant from the King of Spain to some of the earlier conquistadors in about 1700s. The grantees had to take forcible possession of the land from the Indians before it was improved and cultivated. Growing of grapes and manufacture of wine was the principal industry. So Don Francisco married Clarita Sanchez, and they forcibly took possession of land from the Indians. And I do believe that was in the area of Cebolleta. Here's a picture of a census record from the village of Cebolleta from 1850, and it shows Francisco. It says, looks like an S, but it's Landavazo, and Clara Landavazo, Liberada Landavazo, and Jesus Landavazo was 1 month old. Wait, is that Jesus? Yes. And then the map shows where Cebolleta, they call it Cebolletita. And the history of this is interesting, as both Clarita and Don Francisco both had land grants, so they came very rich, but they, as it said, they had to take the land from the natives. And in an article by Robert Julian, Julyan, called Name Places of New Mexico, he talks about Cebolleta and how Cañoncito, the reservation's main village, is located near the confluence of several canyons, one of which likely accounts for its name, Little Canyon. Other Navajos called the Cañoncito Navajos either enemy people or drawing water from a well people, and several stories attempt to explain why this small band lives as much as 75 miles from the tribe's main reservation. Tradition has it that the Cañoncito Navajos had lived in the Mount Taylor country since at least 1700 and remained there while the main portion of the tribe moved farther west. The name enemy people comes from an alleged betrayal by a Navajo named Joaquin in 1818, who revealed to the alcalde at Laguna that the Navajos planned to attack the pueblo and nearby Spanish settlements. So this would be where Don Francisco and Clarita would have been in Cebolletita. Joaquin unsuccessfully opposed the attack. Regarded as traitors by the other Navajos, he and about 200 followers placed themselves under Spanish protection and settled in Cebolleta, near their present location. Despite earlier ostracism from other Navajos, the group now is represented in the Navajo tribal government at Window Rock, Arizona. The reservation includes nearly 77,000 acres and is home to about 1,500 people. The reason I read this is because this is about the time that our family was in Cebolletita, and Water Canyon on the map is close to Magdalena, which isn't shown on the map, but this is all a really early rich history of the Landavazos in New Mexico.